Get started here. We got a couple stragglers that will be coming in as time permits. So in any case, we've got some new members here that we didn't have during the last meeting. So what I'd like to do is go around the room. We'll start on this side and sort of go around the room and sort of reintroduce ourselves. One of the things I'd like to apologize for beforehand, since this is a different venue than the place we were last time, I forgot about the tent tables. They're the little tent things that say your name on them, so we're going to have to bear through the name game this first time, but we'll have them for next time. I thought about that in the shower this morning, and I thought, well, a little late now. So in any case, my name is David Ladd. I am the Manager of External Research Programs for Trustworthy Computing for Microsoft Research, and one of the co-hosts, co-founders, what have you, of this board. So, Scott?
I'm Steve Lipner, and I'm Scott Chorney, the Chief Security Strategist here at Microsoft.
I'm the real Steve Lipner, and I'm the Director of Security Engineering Strategy in the Security Business Unit.
No, I'm as part of this.
Good morning. I'm Peter Cohen. I'm the 2-week-old Chief Privacy Strategist for Microsoft.
I'm often mistaken for Steve Lipner. I'm Ian Spafford from Purdue University.
I'm Richard Gligor, University of Maryland, and I'm never mistaken for Steve Lipner.
Chris Mitchell from Royal Holloway, University of London.
Ira Rubenstein. I'm Associate General Counsel and deal with privacy and security issues, and I'm the only person who's almost as old as Steve Lipner.
Martina Bari, University of California at Santa Cruz.
Elisa Bertino from the University of Milan, Italy.
Niraj Suri, TU Darmstadt, Germany, and University of Texas, Austin.
I'm Dick Kemmer. I am as old as Steve Lipner. I never mistook him for Gene Spafford. I'm from UC Santa Barbara.
I'm Greg Morissette from Cornell University.
What, no Lipner slaps there? Come on.
I'm Steve Lipner's son.
Yeah.
I'm Dave Patterson. Some of you may not recognize me with my new haircut. You can hear my voice. Same guy. And I'm from UC Berkeley.
James Whitaker, Florida Tech.
Fred Schneider, Cornell.
Vijay Varadarajan, Macquarie University, Sydney.
Fred Kate from Indiana University.
Paul Schwartz from New York City Zone, Brooklyn Law School.
Deirdre Mulligan, UC Berkeley. And Dave, I didn't recognize you from the back. I'm seeing you from the front.
Oh, I'll keep my hands up.
It's very flattering.
We had a latecomer.
I'm Jeanette Wing from Carnegie Mellon University. I'm Steve Lipner's daughter.
Yeah.
Joe was, but
The man is getting around here. Okay, I thought for this first session, as previously advertised, this is going to be sort of an open session, but the agenda is pretty much free-flowing, but there's a few things that I did want to cover. The administrative details, there's a few that have been updated since the last time, nothing really major, but if you need to get a hold of us and we're not around, these are our internal lines for Noel or myself. If you need to, get something changed or what have you, feel free to grab us or call us or what have you. Travel update. This is probably not going to be much of a big deal, but due to some interesting interpretations of tax law, the tax attorneys here would prefer if in the future when we have these meetings that you folks go ahead and book your travel yourselves and we'll just go ahead and handle the reimbursement. Now hopefully that won't cause any problems, but the tax law is sufficiently weird enough to where it would probably be best for everyone if we just go ahead and do that and then work on a reimbursement deal. Is there any problem with that? Anyone got any questions, comments? Mr. Whitaker.
Can you make the hotel reservations for us?
And we can get the blocks. We can do all of the of the things to make sure that the rates are good and all of that kind of stuff. But
can we rent a taxi?
Sure, you can do whatever you like. And there's really no problem other than fortunately the Concorde's not flying anymore, so I don't have to worry about those. But yeah, it's a weird thing, and to be honest, I don't know where it manifested, but that's the conditions what prevails. So in any case, instead of a note taker this time, We're videotaping this meeting, so you will see the cameras from around the room. It stays inside the board, inside Microsoft, so you don't have to worry about any commentary going any place that you may not desire it to. So it's just something for you to be aware of. I don't think there needs to be anything other than, a notification that that happens. And if anyone has any issues with that, let me know quick.
Are closed sessions videotaped too?
The board closed sessions? No, with cameras off, definitely. So yeah. And once again, confidentiality. For those of you that are new, these are NDA level meetings and are Microsoft confidential. So if you hear anything in here that should stay in the room, please leave it here. So in any case, the first session is going to be a sort of a hodgepodge of things. We're going to go over a few status issues, progress on the action items from last meeting, introduction of Peter Cullen, who's already given himself sort of the introduction here. Update on the GCAD acquisition, update on the Pelican acquisition and what that means for us. We may have to move those towards the end because the people that are involved with, that are more intimately involved with that, we may be able to have them come sort of at the latter end of the session, and maybe they can add a little meat on the bone, if you will. Update on Steve Lipner's firing. Update on MSR management changes. There have been some changes within my organization for the better. Discussion of outstanding board slots. We got some sort of we got feedback last time around, but it was pretty nebulous as to what areas we need to augment the board with. So we'd like to hit that at some point. And there were some bug fix and process issues that have been in the news lately that quite a few of the board members said, hey, maybe we should throw that out on the table to discuss to see whether or not the processes that are in place now will be sufficient for the future and moving forward. So you will see us going in and out of the discussion of these issues, whether it's Scott or myself or Steve or what have you. The second session, starting at 10 o'clock, is basically threat modeling school. That's when Mike Howard and Frank Swiderski are going to come in and talk in much more detail than those of you that were at the faculty summit yesterday, talking in quite a bit more detail about the threat modeling process. And the things that we're looking for from there are, where do we need to fill in the blanks? Where will this process fit into your particular areas of subject matter expertise, or will they? Or what changes need to be made to make sure that they do fit into your areas? Things of that nature. The final session of the day, between 4 and 6, is going to be the Windows Privacy Standard and the Windows Privacy Architecture. We have the director of that effort coming over to give a full update on what we're doing there, and trying to meet the board's needs on wanting to be in on the ground floor and being in a timely fashion to make a difference on some of this kind of stuff. This is in its very nascent stages, so if you have feedback about what we're doing here, now's the time to do it. Then finally, dinner at the third floor Fish Cafe. We will have a shuttle that takes people from here directly to dinner. For those of you that can't make dinner or have other conflicts, we'll figure that out and make sure that you can get back to the hotel without a problem. So with that, I'll leave it up to you folks to decide. We can either start through the action items, the list of action items that you folks gave back to us, or we can sort of pick off a few of the other ones, like the quick and dirty discussions of Steve and MSR management changes and things of that nature. Any feedback, thoughts about that kind of stuff? What you want to hear first? Because the list that I have with regards to action items is pretty long. I got a lot of marching orders from you folks. So,
I'd say action items.
Action items first? Is everyone cool with that? All right. Let's go ahead and roll with that then. There were a number of items that were procedural in nature. There were a number of items that were technical in nature. I'll go ahead and outline the procedural ones first. These were taken essentially from the notes that the board and Fred presented back to me last time. And there were also some that were extracted from some of the private commentary that some of you had mailed, or individual commentary that you had mailed back to me. Now, one thing I would like to recommend is there were quite a few of you that did have some supplementary comments back to me. I enjoyed those comments. They added some context to some of the action items. So for this next board meeting, by all means, if you have commentary, please send it. It's very definitely welcomed. But the first thing, and one of the major points, was need to have senior leadership present for the entire meeting, and also have senior people from the presenting organizations coming in so they can hear the feedback directly from the board. That's done. It's ongoing. There will be, obviously, with regards to the folks that are in the room, we're going to be here for the entire session. I mean, there will be some floating in and out based on other things that, other commitments that are sort of competing here. But, for example, Palladium tomorrow, you're going to be hearing from John Manfredelli. You're direct decision maker in this case. Dan Ling from MSR is going to be here during the session tomorrow. So there's going to be very high-level people, both from SBU or Scott's organization or what have you, in these meetings going forward, depending on the subject matter. Timing and length of discussion format, all these were basically, look, no more fire hose. So essentially we've tried to take care of that. More and longer breaks. The breaks are half an hour at a shot now, allowing you to sort of discuss what you've heard offline, catch up with us, get any changes you need made, what have you. Fewer talks on day 2. We've got one discussion tomorrow, and that's Palladium, and then you folks are open for your own board discussions. First session should be for committee discussion. This is essentially what we're hoping for at this point, is if there's any open items or any things that need to be discussed, that's what this is for. Speakers available at dinner reception. There will be at least a half a dozen Microsoft folks at dinner tonight, quite possibly more. Not enough time for informal discussion with speakers following their talks. Again, back to the longer break session and longer boards session or board-only session. So that has also been expanded to allow you folks to discuss these issues even more. Other items, I mean, these are pretty mundane, but email aliases created, websites created for distributing the content, copies of the minutes on the website, to-do list based on topics raised in this meeting. I use that, or I basically consider the action item list that was given to me by Fred as my to-do list. So whether that's proper or improper, or whether you want something formal, let me know. A better read-ahead package would be preferred. Partially done. It's some of the things that we're talking about are works in progress. So getting sufficient read-ahead is going to be a hit-and-miss situation. I did get it for the Windows Privacy Standard. I did go over and talk to Jeff, and he got it to me in a reasonable amount of time. There were some changes going on with the threat modeling process, so there wasn't a whole lot that I could throw out to you prior to the meeting, but I have a feeling that we'll be able to get things post-meeting and going forward. Prefer to hear about things when we can still have impact. Again, partially done. Some of the things you're going to hear about are things that are well into the development process. Some of the things like the Windows Privacy Standard, the Windows Privacy Architecture, you're definitely going to be able to have impact. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. The board should have the opportunity to have input on the agenda. I think the fact that we're moving these things around is the fact that you do have input on the agenda. If there are other things you would like me to do to include you more on the input of the agenda for these things, that's fine. But what I'm running into here is I've got a situation where I've got a lot of content and I've got a finite amount of time, and trying to balance the board's desire to have longer sessions with better quality and trying to get some of the content done. I'm having to queue up a lot of the things that you folks want to talk to, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We may want to change the composition of the board. Now, that's one of the outstanding items for us. The notes that I got back had a number of different opinions with regards to where we need to fill in the blanks on the board. Right now we have one open spot. It was mentioned that perhaps we need someone in networking security. If you've got any thoughts about that kind of stuff, please toss them out. Are there any blanks that we need to fill in? Or not?
Too early in the morning.
Too early in the morning? Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go ahead and think about it over the day, and maybe we can have it in an informal conversation, and maybe that can be an action item for the board deliberations to give us a little bit more concrete, idea of where things should go. Technical commentary. Stride Windows Security Push software engineering process. You will see that many more of these topics and action items will have to be, again, queued up for future sessions. The first bullet here, need to better understand the threat model, Stride, etc. Well, that's essentially what this first session from 10 o'clock on and Mike Howard is for. What is the whole software development process, in particular design and architecture? Obviously, that's something that we can queue up for a future session. Revisit the security process vis-a-vis long-term culture change. That's an open question. What I need is a little bit more context with regards to that. What are people looking for, with specifically with regards to that kind of stuff? Is there some sort of proof point that you have in mind? That I've seen a lot of feedback that from individual board members that said, okay, I can sense the trend that there is cultural change going on here, but at the end of the day, it would help if I knew if you had personal metrics as to what you might think a cultural change, a successful cultural change is taking place is. Let me know about that kind of stuff. But that's sort of an open-ended question, so I can't give you a by God we've done it answer.
Let me interject. I remember that question. I think the question was that there are a number of product groups that have undergone the security training and the products themselves has gone through the push and the audit and so forth, but not all of Microsoft. And so the question was, how pervasive is it throughout all of the product groups? I think that was the question.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts, commentaries?
And also, with respect to the future session, Steve, I thought you were going to hand out this whole code of engineering with respect to the second.
Yep.
The software development process.
Okay.
And how the security.
The document that you reviewed last week. I don't think we queued up to do that. It's about 10. I mean, it's about 10 minutes work to do it. So we can have it for you before.
Okay. So I think there was maybe you got this list of things and maybe didn't understand exactly what.
There were some, some of the things there were some context back with the individual mails that came back that sort of fit into some of this stuff, but I needed a little bit more meat on the bone on some of that.
Yeah. So
anyway. My recollection is a little bit different from Jeanette, but consistent, which is that I think we were not feeling that all of the groups that we heard from got the religion quite consistently, and in particular the Longhorn guy was quite a shock to us.
Yeah.
And there was some of that going on, I think.
Yeah. Magna mea culpa with regards to the Longhorn. With regards to the Longhorn session last time, it was a series of domino-like events that got the people that should be speaking couldn't make it because of an emergency.
It was very interesting to see that guy. I'm not saying it was
right.
It's just
no, and understood. There were also some discussions and some of the informal discussions and some of the feedback that I got too that there were people that would like to know how are we going to push this down to the partners that we work with. It's one thing for Microsoft to secure their code, but we've got an awful lot of device driver code, this, that, and the other thing. Is there any emphasis going forward with that kind of information as well? And I am not privy to that, but you.
Yeah, I am. I mean, you want me to sort of take some of these things on the fly?
That's what the session's for.
Okay. So, with regard to the development process, we have we've developed a brief document that is a high-level view of what we expect product teams to do at each stage during the life cycle, during the development of a new product or a product version. That I can get it printed out. I can hand it out to you. The authorship is Mike Howard and me, so it probably makes most sense to do that sometime this morning, so that if you want to grill us on it, you can do that while Mike and I are here. In terms of what that is, it's a high-level guide the version that's on the web is hyperlinked to some more detailed documents. There's clearly detail to add yet, and it's a work in progress. I say that in that way because I got some very good and extensive comments from one board member who shall remain nameless but professes to be my daughter and is on sabbatical at MSR this year. And so I don't want to oversell the thing, but it does tell you what we're trying to do. With regard to who has to do it, it's the TWC security life cycle, security release cycle, is mandatory for business products. Okay, and where do we draw that line? Well, games aren't doing that yet. On the other hand, we just had Works, for example, at least, which is a consumer, sort of consumer lightweight version of Office. In that case, we did actually impose some of the TWC security requirements on them before the last release. But certainly, with regard to anything that you'd find, in a business or on a business network, the TWC release cycle is mandatory. Now the problem that we're still dealing with is getting that word out broadly, getting everybody up to speed on what it means, and getting the resources in place to support them. And the problem is not the big groups, but the small ones. And there are a number of things that come up with smaller products, smaller components out of band releases, other things. And we're just working through those on an evolutionary basis.
Can I add to that? To some extent, we're becoming the victim of our own success, I would say, which is there are some small groups who we still have to educate about this process. But the more we have done this, the more we have said to every group, look, you can't ship without a security push and a review. There is now a queue lining up for products for security pushes and reviews. And the product groups do the pushes, but then there's a review by the Secure Windows Initiative team. And that queue is starting to be a huge delay. So a product can come in and say, we want a security review, and the problem is you may have to wait 7 months. They go, it can't take 7 months to do our review. And we go, no, the problem is you're 9th on the list. By the time we get to you, it'll be 6.5 months, and then it'll take 2 weeks to do. The easy answer to that, of course, is throw more resources at the problem. The reason that doesn't work very well is the number of people who can actually do this well is small. You can really understand it well. I mean, you're going to hear from Mike Howard, people who have devoted a lot of time to figuring out this methodology. Because, of course, we're doing the obvious stuff. We need a train-the-trainers program. We need a bigger pool of people who can do this, even if it requires hiring people. But, hiring is not the answer when you can't find people who know how to do this. So, to some extent, Steve is right that we still have to do more evangelism than we're doing it. Really pointing out that at the same time, we have this other problem, which is we are being successful. It's creating a backlog.
Yeah, I mean, those two things, sort of interact in perverse ways. I mean, we get the word out, and then somebody will say, "Oh my gosh, I've sort of escaped this thus far, but I can't ship without it." So then you have what could be a planned request for support turning into a last minute one. If you look at the document, you'll see that we've tried to address things in a scalable way. We focused on training, we focused on standard process, we focused on security pushes, all of which the teams do with relatively little, security team, SWI team involvement. But this audit, this last review before ship, is something where we feel that we need to have the SWI team do it. And so that's a bottleneck in both the good and bad sense. It's a bottleneck in that somebody can't ship without passing the requirements, but it's also a bottleneck a bad sense that we don't have enough resources, that there's a crunch, and we're just I think that's a big problem. There's no way to work around that.
Is this something you want ideas on, or you've got to?
Of course,
absolutely.
You've got ideas sometime later.
Well, let's do the following. Let me get this document off the web and get some copies printed for you. When you hand it out, there's a sort of a one-chart summary that we can walk through, and maybe at lunchtime entertainment, Mike and I can walk. You can glance at the document, and then maybe at lunchtime entertainment, Mike and I can walk through that one slide. And you can either provide feedback real time, you can provide it after the fact, or we can schedule the session at the next meeting.
Mm-hmm. And again, whenever, as long as we get the feedback and get the commentary, I mean, that's the important part. It would be best if at some point we could get it in written format so we can have something to codify and use as marching orders moving forward. But anytime you care to give it. So.
I guess the question that occurs when you're saying there are very few people who can do this. Is that a matter of training? Is it a matter of experience? Is it a matter of innate interest in problems?
I'd say more the first. Well, maybe all of the above. So certainly we see this when we hire people with computer science degrees. They don't know a lot about security sometimes. Then this whole push process, right, and the threat modeling and all this stuff is relatively new even for the company and at the scale at which we're doing it. Then there's always this issue of, so do you want to sit around and review somebody else's products all day, or do you want to be building something new? And even as we innovate around security, do you want to go off and build a new secure, Palladium-type device, or do you want to spend your whole life just reviewing the work of others to make sure that it passes the test?
So that sounds like whether joining your organization is a good career move.
Right, and some of it, of course, is we are, and I talked about, I may have talked about this yesterday. I mean, we're doing a lot to change the way the company functions and to reward the right behavior, right? So this year, we're doing the performance reviews now, and this year, for the first time, Trustworthy Computing is actually a formal review goal. Because one of the things that is now part of the HR process is our corporate values of honesty, integrity, good challenges, all that. And they relate to certain tenets, and we have like 6 or 7 major tenets. And one of them is trustworthy computing. So now, you need to set goals and be measured against trustworthy computing components. So it's going to affect your pay, your bonus, your stock plan, everything. So we're doing the right kind of stuff. I suppose there are some options we'll have to look at, like any other kind of job, right? If it's either high risk or hard to retain, sometimes you pay them more. But that has its own implications. It had this at the Justice Department, so we needed special, cyber processing. So there was a pay scale the government came up with to reward higher tech people, like you basically give them some extra money. And the problem was we create amazing morale hits everywhere else in the division. Oh, his section gets more money. What do we chop liver? We're putting drug dealers in prison, and we're fighting the war on terrorism, and his people get more money. And you say, well, but that's because you can't get high tech people. It raises all sorts of difficult problems.
Have you thought about rotating people through?
Yeah, that would be fine, except in part the learning curve. It would be great if you had a pool from which to rotate. So we did that with like AUSA's prosecutors in the field, rotate them into the section, but they all knew how to be prosecutors. And most of them were the cyber prosecutors in the field, so they had the background.
Obviously you can educate them when you rotate them in, but the advantage of rotating them out is the more of them that are on the outside, the higher quality stuff you're going to get.
Absolutely, that's right.
Yeah, at this point, this is a relatively new initiative at this scale. 3 years ago, the SWI team was around with 2-3 people. And the magnitude is bigger now, still not as big as and could get bigger yet. So what we do, as we do the reviews, as we work with product groups, is try to find, basically people who would like who would be good candidates to join us, and then the sort of usual things happen. People at Microsoft tend to rotate, and so I think that over time we'll have folks go back into product groups, to seed that. We haven't been at this scale long enough to have anybody go back out yet, but that will evolve.
Yeah. Well, I have some ideas, but I'm not going to give you any suggestions yet until I get a little more into what you do. I have a couple questions. How many penetration testers do you have in the SBU that are responsible for auditing these products that you say if you have a 9-month?
So yeah, the process is a little bit different than that. So every product group, certainly the major ones anyway, have their own group of penetration testers. There are two pieces to this process. One is the security push, and the second is the security review. And the security push is the code reviews, the threat modeling, and the pen testing. And then the security review is having someone independent from that group go through and do kind of a quality assurance check of the push, make sure that all the bugs have been logged, they've been triaged the right way, they've been fixed, all that kind of stuff. So Steve will correct me if I'm wrong, but the security push is done in the product groups, and it's done by the pen testers and others there. And the SWI, the Secure Windows Initiative Team, is the group that does the review. But the review, particularly now at the beginning, has to be extremely robust. I don't know, maybe you do, like in Office or in Windows, how many people are in the pen testing group. I looked at the email because they all have distribution lists, and they're fairly large groups.
I'm thinking of George Stephakopoulos' group, though.
Yeah,
He's the review group.
Right. Yes. Review. That was my question. How many people? How many pen testers do you have in the review group?
Our team is authorized around a dozen.
Okay, so that explains the 9-month backlog.
Well, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me relate another issue. So I guess this is a suggestion. I have a student, incredible security tester. Guy can break anything. Microsoft came to campus, interviewed him, asked him developer questions. He did okay. He got an offer as an STE, software test engineer, in some group that he had no desire to work for. He now works for a commercial penetration testing company. So one of your problems is that these 12 people that work in this group need to be influencing your hiring practices at university. Some of these people need to be in the interview loop going out because they're not being asked security testing questions or security questions in general. They're being asked, why is a manhole cover round? How do you make an M&M? This is great. Some people need to know how to make M&Ms, and I'm sure they have some problem-solving ability that is important, but I don't think you're really targeting properly people who know about security.
It's good feedback. That's something we can fix.
And you missed this guy, man. I'm sorry for you.
You don't look at every campus equally, of course, but I think we need to. We know we need to do a better job of that selection. We're looking at some things, in the HR system to try to make that more of a focus.
Yeah, they are starting to work with people trying to get more domain-specific recruiting, and security is one of the big ones that they've been.
They are out there, and this guy right here knows the universities where they're being trained better than anybody probably, and they're going to work for companies that specialize in penetration testing.
Do you have an intern program?
Yeah.
Well, let me also make the suggestion. You said there was a motivational issue in part, and Fred made the comment about rotation, which occurred to me as well. But what you can do with that is you could actually insert a phase where people who are managing the push within their group are actually doing some of the review of other groups in a more competitive setting. And that actually could add a little bit of enthusiasm to what they're doing and take advantage of some of the competitive nature of the individuals involved.
It's a good idea, too. That's basically SWI could put on retainer some of the pen testers in other groups and have them do work under the SWI.
You can even set as an incentive at some point that whichever group produces the fewest of these that are found by other groups, or whichever one finds more of another group's. could get some kind of recognition, whatever form that may take.
That's a good idea, too. Great. You're laughing because...
Well, I can just imagine the unhappiness with groups between themselves and the rivalries and so on, but Microsoft does not have a reputation of being a kind, gentle place anyway. So.
Well, actually, so this is a little off topic, but something we talked about at length yesterday, and Peter knows. But part of the change of corporate culture that we need in the company is better cross-group collaboration, right? Historically, it's been very competitive, but in a way that, in its extreme, has not been healthy, in my view. And if this is done right, this can become more of a game than a hostile war. And the key is just to manage it right, create the right incentives, right? But if you make it cutthroat about what happens and what the results are, yeah, it's going to foster the very thing that we need to change the other way. On the other hand, if we make it more cross-group collaborative, then, but you're right, we need to be careful about that. But we're very conscious about that problem. And so the groups have been very competitive, which has been good for fostering innovation. But sometimes, because of the way the credit is allocated, we want to be, and this is true in government agencies, and it's true everywhere on the planet. As a partner at PwC, you got credit for sending work to another partner, which is great. But if your client built up a rapport with that partner and decided they wanted to work with them instead of you, you were hosed, right? So you want to refer them to a partner who would help them and make you look good, but didn't make you look bad. Right? There's always those kind of competitive elements. But I think Spaff's point is right, that if we do this right, we can get the benefit. And even maybe foster the right culture, which is this collaborative, help make the company stronger culture.
And I think that there are two. Actually, I mean, even as far back as the Windows security push, just thinking back to it, I mean, the SWI attack team that we have now, basically didn't exist. So we went into that with an SWI team, 2 or 3 people, and the way we got through that and lived to tell the tale was by relying on the penetration team staffs from office and from the common language runtime, the developer division, to augment and really jump in and take over. And I guess people from Scott's team that may have before Scott was here to do that. So we do get that. We have been relying on it. At the same time, I mean, development groups recruit and staff, based on the workload of shipping their own products, and so you kind of want to be respectful of that just from the standpoint that if I'm a dev manager, I can basically manage across any predictable workload, but I can't be randomized to be supporting initiatives I didn't know about when I started. So that's something we just have to get into. We still do a lot of cross group with
So, all right. With that, why don't we go ahead and hit the next bullet? Bring in Microsoft Technical Education to hear their views. That's obviously something that we can do in a future session. Right now, it's a work in progress. I mean, as they get best practices and incorporate them into our development and quality procedures, they're making sure that those get into the education for future generations and for ongoing training of existing folks. But that's very definitely something that we can queue up for a future session. Next question, assurance. How does Microsoft measure whether security is increasing and improving? And I don't know how many times Steve and I have had this discussion of, okay, metrics. Is my metric the same as your metric? Do we have some sort of way to codify whether or not things are actually improving, and how would we go about doing that? That's an open question. I mean, and that's something that is a topic often discussed around here. And I know you and Mike have also thought about it as well. Have you made any conclusions?
Mike and Jeanette and John Pincus from MSR have been looking at the attack surface measurements, and I think Mike talked about that at the January meeting. The thing that we've really been focusing on, and I can tell you all the reasons why this isn't a good metric, but we do it anyway. Windows Server 2003 has shipped, and so what we're doing, just sort of from a relatively practical perspective, is saying, okay, how many security vulnerabilities that cause us to issue security bulletins are we getting, and how does the number and the severity of those bulletins compare to what we did in the corresponding life cycle of Windows XP and Windows 2000. There are about a gazillion reasons that I can tell you why that's not a perfect metric, but it's a metric, and it's an interesting one, and it's sort of a gross level. It gives us a how did we do, and what we are finding, is that we didn't ship a perfect product, which we didn't expect to, but that the number is tracking. The number is tracking about half Windows 2000. The number is tracking maybe 75-80% of Windows XP. The severity is lower. Interesting. I don't know what this. We severity rate security bulletins. Severity rating is lower than Windows 2000, and the severity rating is much lower than XP. We have a critical, important, moderate, low, and all the attack surface mitigation has driven the severity rating on Windows 2003 way down compared to XP.
Or, since it's so early in the process, it could be that you picked all the low-hanging fruit. It's just time until people go a higher fruit.
That's possible, but that's possible. But I don't especially see that happening. Okay, and why do I say that? I mean, I say that just based on gut feel after 3.5 years in the Security Response Center.
I would also say that wouldn't be a bad thing.
Your gut feel is probably the best metric you've got, Steve.
Well,
it's not very scientific.
Definitely qualitative in nature.
I'm answering gut feel, particularly with regard to the low-hanging fruit. What I want to do if I'm a hacker, is not to wait till we ship, but to start with the betas and then see if the vulnerabilities are still there. And I want to come out early rather than late because early gets me publicity, as the latest stage of delirium showed us. There may be, there are obviously additional things that'll trickle out, but I think early is indicative. Fred?
I have two things to add. One is, ultimately, you really want a metric that is predictive rather than a posteriori. And second, I think there's a masking effect that you have to pay attention to, and that was the genesis for some of the comments about the attack surface business. One of the big consequences of this methodology is you turn off features before you ship them, and that's a very cheap way for a software developer to reduce the attack surface. The net effect is you could be sending out a piece of code that is very insecure, but because there's so much less of it that actually can run, until the person who's installed it tries to do something and turns a feature on, that you really, I mean, there are these time bombs out there. They may get turned on in 9 months or something like that. So there was this artificial way to reduce the set of vulnerabilities in something you were shipping, but also shipping lots of latent vulnerabilities. And you need to somehow factor that out. And when you evaluate how secure the product is for purpose of doing process evaluation, you have to do it per line of code as opposed to per turned on feature.
I agree. Let me say that from my perspective, when I think about security secure by default, the only advantage that I see is it makes the product easier to manage if you keep that feature off, right? And you're not using it. But secure by default is useless for security. Absolutely correct.
But secure by default would be great as long as default didn't mean having stuff turned off.
Right. Well, but my point is, as a lawyer, I could say, yeah, let's make this secure by turning everything off so nothing works. And one of the things that I see, and I talk about internally in discussions, is when people say, well, this is mitigated because it's off by default. I go, that doesn't mitigate it. It's off by default. Don't we want customers to turn it on? I mean, we built this feature. We want them to use it if it's something they want to use. It doesn't mitigate anything.
So as a result, I think there's this initial effect that is an artifact of the pressure that was put on people during the push and so on. And you need to get beyond that to really start understanding whether this stuff is secure.
I agree that we should not and cannot use secure by default as an excuse for doing a lousy job of code review. Okay, I think that's what you're telling me.
Well, I think it's more than that. It's saying to say secure by default is security is actually a mistake.
Well, I don't agree. Okay, and the reason I don't agree is because because I worked here during Code Red, Ninda, and Slammer. Okay,
but that's my point. It helps them manage security because if it's off, they don't have to worry about it. Right? So in Windows Server 2003, IIS is turned off by default. Right?
Right.
We built IIS because we want people to use it as their information server.
Right.
So we want them actually to turn it on and use our product as opposed to using a patch.
But we want them to use it. I mean, that's the challenge of designing this stuff. We want them to use it in the most effective possible way and in the safest possible way. Okay. So that means that we want to make it very easy for them to use what they need and no more. Okay, and I claim that even if our code review and our threat modeling and so on were a lot better than they are, that would still be an appropriate thing to do.
Oh,
I remember having a conversation, back not long after I came to work here, about something, and somebody said, well, we have to make this feature discoverable, and my response was, that to me a discoverable feature was one that caused your server to get hacked when you didn't know it was there and weren't using it. Okay, now that's sort of the extreme of then versus now of how Microsoft designed software. I do think we shouldn't. We have to review everything. We shouldn't use secure by default as an excuse for not doing good design and good code review, but we should still use secure by default as a way to limit attack surface and reduce risk, because it does that. Virgil.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean by secure by default. Of course, fail-safe defaults are excellent, but essentially turning off a feature which is flawed is not going to be a measure which is good for more than about 3 days, between about 3 days and 3 months. As a matter of fact, leaves the system more vulnerable than before in some sense, because hackers look at these features which are turned off, then they start going around the networks and figure out who has this feature turned on, and that's it.
Yeah, but I can't promise if we'd had IIS off, if we'd had IIS off by default. The index server ISAPI filter off by default in Windows in Windows 2000 IS5, there would have been no code red. Okay.
No question.
I mean, so the 10 people using that feature would have gotten their systems well and thoroughly hosed. Okay, but there would have been no code red.
Nobody's arguing that this feature is, doing that is useless in the short run. As I said, between 3 days and maybe 30 days that would work. But as a strategy, that particular item is not very helpful.
I don't agree. I don't agree.
So I think the distinction is between your internal developers and your customers. Mm-hmm. It's good for your customers to have it turned off. It's bad for your developers to think that because it's turned off, the system is more secure.
Exactly right.
That's the distinction.
This is our success story from Windows Server. Okay, we issued this security bulletin back in March, MSO 3007, and that was sort of an exciting time because the way we discovered about that security vulnerability was a customer reported to us that their fully cached Windows 2000 systems were being rooted by somebody using code. And when we came, when we looked at the exploit that they captured for us, came to find out that it was this integer overrun that was not, that in a default exposed IS5 component, not addressed by any of the security patches we run. So that was a potential zero-day worm. It was a potential worm that we didn't have a patch for, unlike Code Red and Slammer. And so we spun up our emergency process to get the patch out real quickly. I also looked at Windows Server 2003. This is the analysis that Dave Oxsmith did after the fact of what of how that vulnerability overlaid onto Windows Server 2003, and the first line there is the code was fixed, the vulnerability wasn't there. Okay, and then there was all this stuff turned off that would have had to be turned on by a user to exploit the vulnerability. Okay. So that's what we'd like to have happen. All this other stuff between the bad guy and administrative privilege, but the first thing on the list, or the last line of defense, that when you get to the vulnerability, it's not there anymore, and we need to do more.
It would just seem that the last comment on the shift is that it's going to be very difficult until you've gone through a few cycles to do any kind of measurement, because to the extent that the shipping secure by default has really radically changed the exposure of most of the systems that are out there, if we assume that many consumers don't turn things back on, then the early results may not be comparable to the last time.
Well, we can measure vulnerabilities at any point and on the fly. Clearly, the Windows Server 2003 has no effect on the potential propagation of a worm. There's not enough. The thing that will determine whether the next internet worm targets Windows or Linux is all about NT4 and Windows 2000 and Windows XP.
But just thinking about, how do you gauge success? Mm-hmm. And to the extent that the default settings have really limited what's available for attack, and that was a pretty radical change, mm-hmm. right? That I think that the metrics of, how much improvement is being made, it makes it harder to figure out what they are.
Well, one way to look at it is by turning things off, you're diminishing the effect of your early customers as testers. Right, because they're not exercising
these features, and in a sense, they're testers. So one question is, how many of these bugs were you catching in, say, Win2K as a result of deployment as opposed to internal testing? Because if there were a lot of bugs that were being caught in the field, that would suggest that this turning off won't be so effective compared to...
That was a better statement I was trying to say. That
Are you asking about security vulnerabilities?
Yeah. I mean, Fred's point is, you turn it off by default, and you're going to delay the situation where a customer finds out there's a vulnerability, and you know, if it was turned on by default, maybe they would have found it earlier.
Well, I think, I don't, customer, extreme statement, customers don't find vulnerabilities. Okay, security researchers, hackers, criminals at the limit do. And so, I mean, I think you're probably correct in the sense that there's a class of folks that'll go for the things that are on by default. Certainly, they go for that first. Looking at the things that are off by default, and that's either because somebody's targeting a specific environment where it's on, which is sort of a higher class of criminal, or just looking at something because it's potentially interesting. But I think that's a fair comment. That's a thing that that we have to compensate for with our internal testing. And I agree with that. But on the other hand, I mean, if there's a vulnerability there, and we get through the entire product life cycle without anybody discovering it, I'm okay with that.
As a sort of a pedantic comment, I don't like really the concept of calling something more secure. Either is secure or isn't, really, and we have higher resistance perhaps or greater reliability, and the off by default reduces impact on the community, but it doesn't make the problems go away. The problems are still there whether or not they're activated or not. And many of the big problems, the splashy problems that some of these people are constantly looking for to create a big public uproar may go away. So we may have some of the ones who are finding that low-hanging fruit stop because they don't get the publicity. But that doesn't mean that underlying problems that may be there have gone away, and that some selected targets may actually be at more risk because they may not see a widespread behavior, and they may view their own behavior as anomalous, or they may not realize they're being specifically targeted. So for a variety of reasons, calling something more secure bothers me, because that implies that it's okay to have some of these in place. I really much prefer to think of that as lessening the impact or increasing the work threshold or some other kind of terminology for it. And that's, I don't know how many other people feel that way, but I believe it's misleading to call it more secure.
We're all in the agreement that lowering impact is a good thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
No question.
But I think it creates a wrong mindset.
Okay, so one more comment on James's comment about low-hanging fruit. I agree with him. I think you've done a reasonably good job of that, and that's how you should start.
Yes.
Because otherwise, hackers would pick the low-hanging fruit. So I think that's a very good thing. The question is, what next? And I sent you a bunch of comments on a number of basically flaws which are not necessarily language dependent. My feeling was that the Howard LeBlanc book actually does a very good job focusing on language-oriented flaws, but it's much weaker. Doesn't mean that it's useless, but it's much weaker in the language-independent design and architecture flaws that affect security. So I think that the next step would be to look at those language-independent, architecture features, which would stay with you for a long time. I mean, a language feature you can sort of fix fairly easily. You just add a tool, perhaps a sophisticated one, to fix it. But the architecture-oriented flaws, once they are in, once you fix your design, it's much harder to change.
The related comment essentially becomes the measures also need to reflect. Right now you're looking at attack surface area, which is again an indication of the low-hanging fruits. You really need to go down at the system level or start saying, what functionality do you want to make have a certain level of robustness, which is independent of the number of features being turned on and off. How do you fundamentally affect your system? And that goes down to Virgil's comment also. It goes away from the external surfaces down to actual functionality. And I think the measures need to also start reflecting those kind of robustness. I'm using robustness instead of security. Robustness has a more linear feeling for me rather than saying something is either there or it's brittle, and that's not necessarily the case for lots of systems. I would rather have security defined in terms of all features being turned on, then assessing a certain level of robustness, then turning features off and then saying, is that robustness actually being perturbed in any way or not, to find out the significance of different features.
Is that clear to you, Scott? This is a very important. I know it's clear to Steve, but I want to make sure that you understand this issues.
Yeah. So
you can build things that look like they have extremely low attack surfaces. They look very innocuous. The example that always comes to my mind is, how about call forwarding? It sounds great. And then accidentally, there's another feature that somebody adds to the phone system, like busy double call forwarding, and that sounds great. But when the two are together, they can be composed in a way that's really insidious. Like it consumes all the resources of the switch because it keeps forwarding the call to itself around in a circle. And low attack surface, it's a design thing. And you can't get those, using a methodology that's worried about buffer overflows and those sorts of things completely ignores that.
No, I understand that. So as we're doing next generation web services and things like that, and we're architecting things from the ground up, there's increased focus on this issue. So here's, I think, where maybe you guys can be more helpful to Microsoft. So I agree with the comment on low-hanging fruit. Having started other programs before, that's usually where you start. Most bang for the buck. Hold on. And the truth of the matter is, when we talk about trustworthy computing being a 10-year initiative, and people said, okay, are you 1 year, you're 1 year through, you're 10% done. I go, actually, in a percentage way, we're more than 10% done, but in a reality way, now it gets really hard. Because the low-hanging fruit is the easy-to-pick stuff. You can do a lot of stuff really quickly, and then what you're left with is the intractable problems or the harder problems. And as you prioritize and knock off each problem, usually what's left is even harder than what came before. Because if they were easy, you get rid of it fast, because you shouldn't let easy problems linger for a long time. Okay, so the next question becomes, I think, is how to prioritize the next generation of security push and review. So if you, we still have work to do on level 1. There are still buffer overruns and all that. But as you get rid of the language problems and you build automated tools to get rid of the buffer overruns and all that, and now you look at architectures, protocols, APIs, all this different stuff, working with third-party vendors whose code you don't get to see, which is sometimes the case. As you think about all the things that go into developing a Microsoft product, if we were going to take a bunch of MSR people or SWI people, new hires, whatever they might be, and said, okay, look, we got these people doing the language stuff and the code reviews and all that. Your job is the next chunk. What would you prioritize as that chunk? Or if you said, no, there are actually 4 chunks you have to do next. They're all of equal importance, right? What are the 4 chunks? So I hear architecture being one, and certainly
I think we should have a discussion of that.
That's what I'm
But it's like
inviting
an
people
hour
to
or
do.
2 hour discussion. I don't think it's instructive for us to address that here.
And with that,
It's important that everybody that first of all, the board agrees that they got that message, and second, that we return to it.
So make that an agenda item.
we'll make a note of that. Just a real quick reminder, right now is when we're supposed to be taking our break. So with the board's permission, we can extend this discussion another 15 minutes, try to blast through some of these items, and then take a 15-minute instead of a 30-minute break. Is everyone okay with that?
One more.
How about just allow a few people to make a last comment, and then we'll take a break. Because we wanted longer breaks last time. You promised us longer breaks.
You people are the abusers, not me. You know. Go ahead, Gene.
Okay, so I would like to just say that one of the things you can use both for thinking about strategy and for explaining this to other people is firewalls. Firewalls put this screen up to screen out some of the low-hanging fruit, the attacks that were really easy, but led to a new set of vulnerabilities because people thought they were safe behind it. It increased the problem with the insider threat and more people trying to get to the insider access, which, again, we have here. You shut off some ports by default to try to keep the attacks out, and yet then we started developing protocols like SOAP to find your way through those protocols or turning them on. It's not a perfect analogy, but for describing to people and perhaps for you to think forward as to where some of the new problems are going to manifest themselves, we have a decade-long experience with firewalls and some of the problems that they brought with them, as well as the defenses. It might be worth thinking about that as a model.
Okay.
Martin?
Comment is, there seems to be an equation going on between fixing buffer overflows or finding them and language stuff. And I somewhat object to that in that I agree that languages can help address buffer overflows, certainly, but they can also help with a lot of the next class of problems, and they can help support architecture by giving you the ability to define interfaces that are enforced. And I think they can be very helpful going forward. And you shouldn't just think that because you've done the language stuff, you don't need to invest in languages anymore.
Yeah. That's what I call a systems level perspective. I think the methodology you have for the time being is an appropriate first step. But you may want to step back, reassess both the measures and the methodology for large infrastructures, which obviously go beyond language level stuff and all that. And that's, again, a longer discussion.
So one of the things that, and it's a random neural firing, but one of the things might be interesting when we look at like the threat models is to what extent could threat models be extended to architectures as opposed to the higher level that it's working at today. It's just, as you hear Michael, you start thinking about that.
The premise of the threat model discussion, the hidden agenda, which is not so hidden, is for the board to tease apart and determine how much of the threat model business is snake oil and how much of it is really legitimate scientific way to address vulnerabilities.
But I'm adding another thing, which is if you find it scientifically valid, can it be extended to do more than the high-level language and interface stuff it's doing today? Could you threat model at a deeper level?
Let's wait and hear first what the presentations are and then come back to the decision.
Right.
BJ?
I think one of the questions you were asking, Scott, was what is one of the next steps in this process? I think the point, I agree with one of the points made here. What we've been looking at is probably mechanistic level, right? Some of the mechanisms like buffer overflow. But we need to move up to the service specification and the interfaces at the design level. I mean, architecture extends from, pretty high level down, so we don't know sometimes, there are different levels of abstraction in the architecture. So I'd like to see a bit more on the design specification, service specification, interfaces, how they interact. Then we can determine the vulnerabilities and the threats there, rather than, I think we've done a lot of work at the mechanistic level, for the lower level down. That's what I would like to see as the next step.
Can I just say something to the board? Of course, I agree with what the board is saying, but I also understand perhaps how products actually, the engineers actually develop their products. And to my dismay, actually, there aren't a lot of specifications and high-level designs written. So, or architectural level descriptions of these things. It's code. That's actually what there is. And so no wonder that there are these kinds of processes that fixate on the code and fixate on buffer overruns and tools and language level stuff. I think this is a deeper cultural change that we would actually have to be, asking of Microsoft, and I think we should be, and here's an opportunity to, where we have to say specifications and design and architectural level descriptions are important and something that has to be part of the software development, not just coding and testing. And security may give Microsoft the edge in pushing that more general statement.
Well, I'd be kind of interested in, like, the Indigo stuff and some of the web services stuff where you've got people like Brad Lovering and others working at the architecture, starting to agitate over the architecture point before the coders go off. You got the same thing, I suppose, with, next generation secure computing base. I mean, there's an example where the architecture is being designed now before the coding. The question is, are they doing it right?
Virgil?
One more, maybe amplify Janet's comment. I do agree that specifications and documentation is extremely important. And what I want to point out that you should really make sure management understands that. The reason why is that they have to plan for it. It increases the cost of your product significantly to do that. Significantly. We are not talking about 5%. We are talking about 25 to 30% in terms of writing specs and writing good documentation. Now, whether you recoup that cost, I happen to believe that you do it in spades. But at some point you have to start planning on it because it's not an afterthought. You cannot go back and do the stuff after you've done the after you've done the coding and the testing. So it's a major expense, and that's why management has to be aware of it, not just the programmers.
But you recoup not only the cost, but then the quality of the product. That's the important thing. And then you get, in some sense, you get screwed.
I'm going to ask a sacrilegious question, if I may. Does any volume manufacturer, vendor of commercial software, in fact, do that sort of specification and document-oriented process?
I can tell you my experience. The only manufacturers that I've seen doing that relatively well, even very well, are the hardware manufacturers. Software manufacturers, not so much.
Well, in the government contracting world, they do because
both of your answers, just so we can be clear. I mean,
But the hardware manufacturers like Intel have said to me flat out, we have to do it or we can't press them out.
Exactly.
But software, you can start coding today and say, okay, here's
But this is not an excuse to not do it.
You're not going to get an argument about that.
I'm not asking right or wrong.
Okay.
I'm asking.
Is there evidence that
I'm asking what do people do and what?
Okay, so let me tell you a very quick story about that. And I'm not sure Bill Gates would remember this, but in 1982 or 83, Mellon did a study with IBM's funding about software development processes around the world. So this team of people traveled to most of the software manufacturers and defense and asked them what kind of software methodologies they used. They went to Japan as well and so on. And what kind of tools they use, what kind of specifications they use, what kind of documentations they did and so on. So they came to Microsoft and they did talk to Bill Gates. And he said, we don't do any of that. What I do, I hire the best programmers I can find. Okay, so everyone was startled by that answer. But it was the right answer at the time for the size of company Microsoft was at the time. And it showed that Microsoft was enormously successful. At the kind of company Microsoft is right now, I don't think that would be the right answer today, and I'm sure that Gates will not give you that answer today. But the point, once again, is you have to figure out how much it will cost to do this, and what are the benefits. And we believe, at least in the academia, we believe that the benefits are enormous, not measured enough to be able to see that the benefits are enormous. And maybe you can come up with metrics for it. But it's
at the risk of offending the risk of offending Jeanette, I mean...
I hate to be assertive as a chairman, but guess what, guys? The break just started.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're going to end it. The break ends at 10. Right. We pick up at 10.
I'm happy to take the notes as they are right now and then forward them back out to everyone so they can see actually what has been done and the status of each of these, and then we can go from there. So.